Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Mr. James Patrick Reid.
Thank you, Dino. Thank you, Father Sebastian. And thank you all for being here tonight. Be transformed by the renewal of your minds. Thus the Apostle Paul exhorts us to our Christian task. Be transfigured. It's the same word. Whenever you read in the New Testament about transformation or transfiguration, it's metamorphosis in the original Greek. Change of form through and beyond, which is also the artist's task. An artist takes matter and gives it a new and richer form. Paul told the Corinthians that we become transfigured when the veil is taken from our faces and we behold the reflection of the Lord's glory. This points us to the supreme role of art, to unveil our perception so as to reveal the Lord's glory reflected in his creation. Art does this by the way it changes the form. Form is a word which has many different meanings, some of them rather superficial or dull, as when we oppose form to content, or we speak of application forms or tax forms, which are meaningless until you fill them out. Forget those tonight. Think rather of form in nature, where it is always deep and meaningful. Physicists explore form down to the molecular and even subatomic levels. Tonight, all of us are going to follow form yet deeper to its origin in the divine creative act. Form is the reason in a thing, the basis for its being. Form actualizes matter, giving it shape and color, making it meaningful and knowable. The general Greek word for form is morphe, but form in this deeper philosophical sense is also designated by the Greek word logos, the plural of which is logi. The gospel writer John calls Christ the divine logos. In the beginning was the logos, the word. But the Hebrew term behind St. John's thought is dabar, which means not simply word, but also deed or act. The many forms or logi of creatures, reflections of the one divine logos through whom all things were made, are not static natures, but acts, dynamic expressions of divine energy, what Isaac of Syria called the flame of things. Existence, you see, is an act. The word exist is a verb. Being is an act. It's best thought of as hyphenated. It's being. It's something going on. The act of existence going on in us and around us ought to arouse our wonder. Wonder is the beginning of philosophy and of art. Matisse used to say that if you want to be an artist, you must learn to look at life with the eyes of a child, because children naturally have a sense of wonder. But as we grow older, we tend to lose that sense of wonder as we develop a more utilitarian approach to life. Yet there are times when, even as adults, we typically do experience wonder. In love, for instance, the lover is granted insight into the poetry of the being of the beloved and finds joy in the very existence of the beloved. Another time when we typically experience wonder is before some spectacle of nature, at the seashore, for example, or at sunset. Now let's suppose you went to the seashore at sunset and experienced wonder, and you wanted to preserve that experience, so you take a snapshot of it. Unless you're a great photographer, your snapshot, while indeed it may remind you of the experience, is not likely to convey the experience. But when Georges Seurat paints the seashore, it's a very different matter. So we have these shapes going up the left edge of the canvas, and they move from the foreground, because this is the nearest shape in the painting. They move up and back to this distant place. But this is not directly accessible to our experience. It's simply a series of shapes rising on the left edge of the canvas. But from here, we swing back this way to this rock. The rock is the alter ego of this shape here, because from here to here we have a long diagonal distance which acts out, which dramatizes the distance from here to here. Another thing that this rock does is, because of the great weight of its shape, its contrast with the surrounding lights, and the way it scoops down in the center, it has a lot of visual weight. So it pushes down on this side. It's like a seesaw. The heavier weight here, the lighter weight here. So as this goes down and this goes up, then the piers bounce down the incline. And then from here we have a pause, and then the heavy weight here, and then the light pushing up against the horizon. So it's like da 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 da, boom, oh, like that. The way the light pushes up and smacks against the horizon there. So, and then that move up to the horizon is echoed by the horizontal clouds, which move in from the right. Slowly, majestically, they move in, leading our eye across the canvas. When we get over to this side, the curving ends, the curve created by the ends of these clouds, leads our eye back over here and drops us back down here into the distance. Because of this move down like this, and this move going on across like that, the space gets warped. Look at this column of smoke here. It cannot go straight up and down. It's caught in the warping of the space, so that it tilts in accordance as it's caught between those forces. Then its blueness partakes of the color of the clouds, while its diagonal quality connects it with the land here. Artists knew about the relativity of space and time long before Einstein. Because the space is pulled so tight by these opposing pressures, tight like a drumhead, it can resound to the slightest tap. So we have the piers here, and they're so quietly stated. They're not big, dark forms. They're very quiet. Bing, 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 ping. But they can resound because of the vibrancy of the entire space. The whole painting pulsates, it acts. Because existence is an act, an artist must so inform the matter, must so arrange the lines, the shapes, and the colors and volumes that the resulting work of art is in act. Every form in nature, and in art which is true to nature, results from movement and expresses movement. Here's Giotto's painting of the Epiphany. Our eye is first of all caught by this king clothed in vermilion. Notice how his shape is very rectangular. It's a square surmounted by a tilted rectangle. So his shapes are heavy. The color of his garment is a dense, heavy note of vermilion. When a great artist wants to paint a kneeling king, he doesn't just dress up a model in a king and have him pose and then copy what he sees. No, the master invents a shape, invents colors that will do what the artist has in mind. Note also that the folds here pull downward. Contrast this king with the other red king. This red is much lighter and airier. His shape is vertically ascending, rather like a rocket ship.
the folds in his garment draw upward. And then note how the redness up here is picked up on by this bit of the red couch on which the Virgin Mary reclines. That red, of course, reappears over here and then appears again over here, surges out like that. And note the relationship between the major vector, the major axis of the rectangular part of this king and that couch. It points directly to it. If you were to cover that part of the picture with your thumb, the kneeling king becomes much less dynamic. This is how artists feel out the relationships in their paintings. Now, the blue shape of the Virgin Mary's mantle swings out with great force, with great rapidity, and then very slowly and gradually it curves around into these tender curves, wonderfully expressing the solicitude of the mother for her newborn son. And it reminds me of a piece of poetry by Blessed Ramon Lowell, who wrote, "Swifter is love in the heart of the lover than is the splendor of lightning to the eyes. The tears of love gather more swiftly than the waves of the sea." This movement out through the blue mantle of the Virgin leads us to the pair of shepherds here, who are almost like one character with two heads and two hands between them, sort of a Tweedledum, Tweedledee. And the change from this one to that one lifts our eye up to a parallelogram of angels. And those angels are kept down in tone. There's not a lot of contrast in them. They're like exhalations of the golden sky, like breaths. Ah, 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 ah. Notice that this one, which slightly breaks out of the parallelogram, has more contrast and attaches to the near end of the roof, so that this edge of the roof then pulls forward as the other side of the roof goes back, and its tone passes into the tone of the gold-leaf sky. In opposition to this movement, this pull of space around this way, there's another path from the blue of the mantle to the blue sleeve on St. Joseph. And notice how this shape curves down around into the foreground and then joins another bit of red. So we have a constellation of reds. And then our eyes discover this area in here, the zone of the animals who are adoring their master. And amazingly, Giotto keeps down the tone of this head of the kneeling king. His head groups with the space of the animals as he joins them in silent adoration. What a marvelous expression of losing oneself in adoration of the Lord. The analysis we've made very briefly of this painting, of its major movements, could be carried on almost indefinitely, because every little nuance, the placement of an eye relative to a nose, relative to an ear, relative to all the rest, is all choreographed in the same way. One could go on and on talking about it. And because it's so full of dynamic form, it continually wells out from within. It's an inexhaustible well. And the unfolding of space within the painting is continuous with an unfolding of the painting towards the viewer. And this unfolding constitutes the work's radiance, what Thomas Aquinas called claritas. It is the hallmark of beauty. The painting illuminates the soul of the viewer and provokes a like unfolding, a rapturous outgoing of the soul towards the radiant form. Now, in painting, this claritas is always the radiance of a physical fact and a kinesthetic experience, that is, a sensation of movement. Pictorial space, like Christian spirituality, is body-centered, not ethereal. Here's a 15th century Russian icon of St. Demetrios. Note the pairing of the cross and the sword, both having an upright and a horizontal. But the cross points up, the sword points down. And the sword is paired then with the shield. The shield echoes the halo. And so we have a dynamic diagonal relationship, diagonal and oblique in the space, from the halo down and forward to the shield. This tension between those forms is opposed by a swing around to the left. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. This is as true of painting as it is of physics. Note the grouping of the hand with this dark shape, which attaches to this curve, which leads us up like that. Notice that this shape here, instead of being where you might expect it, symmetrically placed in the center, it pulls around this way, as if the cross is pulling it around that way. And so a rather forceful movement of space is set up, which goes around and up like this, and when it reaches the head, it warps the head as it pulls the right side of the head out towards the right. And then this slope of the shoulder brings us back down to the foreground, and the sword pushes down the same way. And so the painting is full of spatial tensions. You see, icons, traditional icons, are powerfully spatial. They have nothing in common with Gnosticism, which would imagine the kingdom of God as lacking space or corporeality. Icons, in continuity with the faith preached by the apostles, invite us to comprehend with all saints what is the length and breadth and depth and height, and to be filled with all the fullness of God. Here's a still life by Chardin. Chardin leads our eye into the painting with this cork here. And the cork is surmounted by a sail shape of light reflected in the glass, which rather dances upon the cork. And the edge of that reflection sets up a sharp diagonal. That diagonal pulls against the shadow, the edge of the shadow on the handle of the picture. So we get a tension in space, pulling down here, anchored here. Note how the convexity of the lighted portion of the handle pushes out against that. Meanwhile, on the other side, we have a downward vertical, and then a swelling out here. And so the jug exists in space in terms of the activity, the choreography of its shapes, the way that they push out against nothingness, the way they exist, they stand out against nothingness, and they interact with the surroundings. Look at how on this side, where you have this dark shadow on the jug, we have a cool gray light in the background, which just gently nudges, which kisses the edge of the jug here. And then, after this curve comes down, we have a quiet rest here in the dark shadowed peach back here. Then the painting gives birth to these plums, which move down into the foreground. But no sooner do we arrive down here than another movement is inaugurated, going from the small plums to the large plum to the even larger and ever larger peaches as we move through the rainbow in order, from green to blue to purple to red to orange, and finally to a crescendo of yellow in the burgeoning peaches. In the masterpiece, we see reflected the mystery of the divine conservation of nature as described by Maximus the Confessor and Thomas Aquinas. Nothing exists unless God acts within it as the wellspring of being at every moment. And so a master artist gives birth to forms whose presence is ceaselessly renewed by a continuous pulse. The radiance of form indicates an inner incandescence,
Isaac the Syrian's expression, the flame of things, gets amplified by St. Maximus, who, referring to Moses' vision of the burning bush on Mount Horeb, writes that the unspeakable and prodigious fire hidden in the essence of things, as in the bush, is the dazzling brilliance of the divine love inside everything. It's the fire of divine love and the dazzling brilliance of his splendor inside every single thing. It was in the burning bush that God revealed his name as he who is. He is the existing one, whose creative and sustaining act gives the pulse of existence to all things. Art magnifies that pulse. And so art reveals the spiritual depth of nature. Every being and every activity in nature, and the being and activity of nature as a whole, spring from the one activity of God. Yet the being and action of each part of nature is truly its own and truly distinct from the action of God, though inseparable from it and impossible without it. We see this mystery reflected in biology exactly the same way as in art. For the being, the life and activity of each cell in an organism is distinct and to some degree spontaneous, but inseparable from the life of the whole organism and impossible without it. Speaking of organisms, here's a still life by Matisse. All of the elements are choreographed together so that each movement of every part affects all of the other parts. This corresponds with what we know as Christians, that every deed of ours, all of our words, and even our secret thoughts affect everyone and everything else. Look at this plate of fruit. Now, Matisse gives us an apple here, which is red and green, an apple here, which is red. Together they establish a space between them. And the green apples, with their stem, move through that space. Note the curve of the leaves and the stem in relationship to that curve. It's like an arrow in a bow. Note also that the plate here becomes, it stretches out on this side and becomes whiter, brighter here than it is over here. So that gives a pull back this way, and then we have the arrow pointing up this way. If you follow the direction of that arrow, it brings you up to the handle of the pitcher. This is no accident. The handle of the pitcher moves this way in reaction to the vector of that arrow. This leaf here is so placed as to pull back against this. The bow and arrow would lose its tension if there were not that leaf there. There's a reprise of the same motif over here. Again, the leaves, the arrow, and another handle to respond to it. As this white plate pulls this way, the bottom of the saucer pulls this way. It's not as though Matisse did not know how to draw a saucer in correct perspective as an ellipse. He wanted to set it in motion. So this goes this way, and in reaction to that, the top of the cup goes this way. Here we have blue with white decorations on it. Here we have blue with white lines on it. This is all curves. That's rectangular. This is small. That's big. From here, there's a magnetic attraction then to the larger magnet, up to that area. And so the space of the painting has to move around like this, counterclockwise. And as it moves, it catches the top of the ivy there, the ivy leaves, and that whole mass then pushes this way. It gets pulled
that way. The picture goes through contortions trying to steady itself, to keep itself from falling over, hence the distortions in the sides of the picture. And finally, Matisse reaches around the back of the space and he slaps the picture with that red shape. It's like a hand, which, pulling the picture this way, tightens up the entire space. A masterpiece is symphonic. Every note of color, every nuance of line occurs at just the right time, in just the right place, as in a piece of music by Bach or Mozart, where every note occurs in the fullness of time, at the juncture prepared for it. This deep ordering of the work sets it free, so the work breathes a fragrance of freedom and lifts the viewer or the hearer into an atmosphere of freedom. Here we face the paradox of ordering or governance, freedom, and providence. God's governance of creation makes us free when we truly say, "Thy will be done," or when we sing with the psalmist, "I will walk at liberty, for I seek thy precepts." There are two ways that one can go astray if one loses sight of this mysterious paradox. There are some who, mistaking license for freedom, opt for license in life or in art and end up imprisoned in meaninglessness or formlessness. On the flip side, there are artists who work very hard to impose order on their works, but from the outside, as one might build a machine, so their work ends up being cramped or forced, not free. The artistic governance which sets a work free is providence, working deep within the forms, in their metaphysical roots, as it were, foreseeing the fullness of time for every detail. This is a reflection of and witness to the divine governance of creatures, which does not inhibit freedom, but rather makes freedom possible by working deep within us and everything around us, in our metaphysical roots, foreseeing every detail. Providence and beauty are inseparable. Together they are always a mystery, even and especially to the great masters when they are actually achieving beauty in their work. The providential choreography in a great painting is not simply copied from nature. It is transposed to the canvas as experienced by the artist internally, according to the painter's own sensibility. The painter must feel the pressures, the weights, the pushes and pulls of pictorial forces as forces within his own body, as if the painting were the artist's body. By making the painting, the artist is inviting you, the viewer, to experience it the same way. Here's one of Cezanne's paintings of the Mont Sainte-Victoire. There's a group of trees here on the left, a lone tree to the right. The group of trees pulls to the left, the right tree, the center tree rather, the center lone tree pulls to the right. Together, they open up a space between them into which the road can wind. That road leads us back, up the canvas, deep into the space, and up to the mountain itself. When we get to the top of that mountain, there's not much contrast between it and the sky. So our eye can pass right up into that sky. But then our attention is grabbed by the parallelogram shape of the crown of foliage on the lone center tree. That brings our eye back down this way. And notice that the sky is much lighter on this side than on that side. And in fact, it presses down upon the landscape here, creating an indentation. And so the space moves clockwise, around and down again. Then we meet the aqueduct. The aqueduct starts out dark, dull, gray, out of focus, and then it picks up momentum like a train. It gets brighter, larger, clearer, and then pow! It pushes past that center tree. And so the space, which was wrapping around and down like that, pulled tight by the tree going this way, meets this counterforce, pushing like that. And note the tuft of foliage at the end of the aqueduct, like a boxing glove. Notice also that Cezanne has not bothered to paint a branch connecting that tree with that tuft of foliage, because he was feeling it in relationship to the movement of the aqueduct. The event of the painting is paroxysmic, and this is the ultimate quality of a masterpiece. We have seen how great works of art are active, symphonic, and providential. The paroxysm is the summation of these qualities. It is the consummation of the pictorial transformation. A paroxysm is an intense upheaval, an earthquake, if you will. Only in our case, it's not destructive, but rather constructive, rearranging everything on a higher level of energy and order, where everything snaps tautly into place, like a trampoline, or a drumhead, or a guitar, or violin string, resilient and vibrant. This paroxysm is the simultaneous breaking open of pictorial space and breaking forth of pictorial light, radiance, claritas. The painting opens up and out, unfolds toward you, faces you, and advances to meet you. It does not retreat, fall back, shut down, or collapse in on itself. The paroxysm is an unceasing explosion, again resulting in increased order, increased energy. Hans Hofmann said that creating pictorial space is like building an atomic bomb. You have to assemble all the elements in such a way that the effects potentize themselves. It may be a sudden blast, as in the Cezanne, or it may be slow, like a sunrise, as in the Giotto. But in any case, it never stops. It just goes on and on. The identification with the work of art, as with one's own body, is a kind of love, for no man ever yet hated his own flesh. A painting can anticipate the never-ending nuptial festival, the feast of the 8th day of creation, the fulfillment of God's espousal of his creation, finally healed and transformed. A painting is a masterpiece insofar as all things in it work together for good, for beauty. A painting manifests a personal and individual relation to the forces of reality, to providence, in fact. Artists and art lovers must cultivate this sensibility, just as Christians must cultivate the love of God in order to see all things working together for good. A casual sightseer in Provence is no more likely to see the providential interdependencies between distance and foreground, among mountain, trees, and aqueduct, than is the casual observer of world events to see all things working together for good. Yet both St. Paul and Paul Cezanne take the veil from our eyes. What lies revealed is the crux of the matter. And I mean the crux, literally, the cross. The cross which St. Augustine called the Lord's marriage bed. This painting is by the Renaissance German master Grunewald. On the left, Our Lady forming a single vertical with the rock, the cliff up there, her mantle, the brown mantle swept up into the shape of the cliff. On the right side, there's the bright form of the garments worn by St. John, which have a lot of pictorial weight to them because of their great contrast with the surrounding darkness. So this pulls down, and notice proximity to the tattered, bright loincloth on Christ. There is thus a vector, a curving vector, a very tight and painful vector going from the Christ's right hand through his arm down to his head, which Grunewald makes very narrow so that it falls within that path, and then coming down here and then anchored down here. The other arm of Christ jabs that arc at a right angle, and so the pain is expressed by the formal means. Note also the twisting of Christ's body. It's a serpentine body, an allusion to the brazen serpent in the book of Numbers. Christ takes on upon himself the likeness of what our sin has caused, even as he heals us. And then finally, see how the crossbeam is bowed. It's pulled tight, like a bow in a bow and arrow. And to ratchet up the pain, the rectangular plaque up here is pushed up against it, pressing that up so that we feel so tremendously the paroxysm of suffering that Christ is going through. How paroxysmic this crucifixion is. In all the art I've shown you, all the forms together form a paroxysm. When our Lord consummated his saving passion upon the cross, the earth quaked. The pictorial transformation of the world occurs through a paroxysm because art is a way of knowing reality. And the world undergoes transformation in a paroxysm. Listen to the scriptures. God, my King, is from of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. The earth shook. The heavens also dropped at the presence of God. Even Sinai itself was moved at the presence of God, the God of Israel. For thus saith the Lord of hosts, yet once it is a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land, and I will shake all nations, and the desire of all nations shall come, and I will fill this house with glory, saith the Lord of hosts. In all the art I've shown you, we are witnessing the paroxysm as a present event, the groaning and travailing of forms breaking through to completion. The saying, beauty is the splendor of being, often meets objection from people frustrated by the implication that everything that exists participates in beauty. The objection and the frustration are no greater than that which meets the saying of St. Paul, all things work together for good to them that love God. Both the saint and the artist see things as a providential arrangement, and both would maintain that their vision is true at a deep level, but neither a newspaper report of a tragedy nor a snapshot of the Mont Sainte-Victoire would yield evidence of such providence. If, as Levergier astutely remarked, divine love is like an atmospheric pressure, then one needs an internal barometer sensitive to this pressure, akin to the kinesthetic sensibilities of a Cezanne before the landscape. The sensibility of the saint and that of the artist are as related as the two meanings of the Greek word kalos, good and beautiful. What a saint expresses by his words and deeds and by his very appearance is the life that wells up within. Similarly, an artist is always expressing his inner life, no matter what the work's motif. Hence the saying of Cosimo de' Medici, which became a proverb in Renaissance Florence, every painter paints himself well. The paroxysmic reordering of perception and materials in art points, along with the biblical texts we quoted, to the paroxysmic reordering of the whole creation, when there shall be a new heavens and a new earth. We are made aware of this transformation as occurring already, but not yet. For all creation groans together and travails together until now. We are always anticipating the fulfillment of all things in Christ. We long for it. This is why every masterpiece which is a thorough work of transformation strikes us as being not only good and beautiful, but also true. Here is Beato Angelico's painting of the martyrdom of Saints Cosmas and Damian and their companions. On the left, a group of onlookers is parallel to the walled city, and their gently swaying postures are a melodic reference to the more upright and rigorous towers of the city, marching back in perspective. Those towers die away in the distant hill towns. And then our eye is brought forward again by the row of trees here, which pick up on the verticality of the towers, but this time marching across the panel in a steady beat, rather like heartbeats. And then the trees themselves die away into the distance. Boom, 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 boom. Do you feel that? Do you feel the way that the pictorial space gets pulled up to the right, pinned in the upper right? And then the curve of the road provides an arc for the swing of the sword, about to be felt by the saint here. All of nature is participating in the martyrdom of these saints. Talk about divine providence. And yet the saint meets his martyrdom in an upright posture. The curving contours of his shape give him a certain lightness, balancing the heaviness of his vermilion tone. His uprightness is amplified by the trees, and he suffers martyrdom in the flowery meadow in brilliant light and color. Blessed Angelico gives us a transformed and transfiguring vision. The transformation of vision illumines the whole body. For the eye is, after all, the lamp of the body. And from the heart and the hands, light spreads to the world. Thank you all for your time and attention.